Welcome back to Unlock, Empower, Transform. I'm Shay Blackmon, founder of Shay Blackmon Consulting, author of High Value Leadership, Transforming Organizations Through Purposeful Culture, and a DBA candidate in organizational leadership. And today we are going somewhere that a lot of people tiptoe around. Let me set the stage. There was a company who spent 6 figures on a DEI initiative. They hired a consultant, they rolled out mandatory training, they printed new posters, they updated the mission statement, very polished, very impressive on paper. And 12 months later, employee engagement scores in underrepresented groups had actually declined. Not stagnated, declined. So the question is not whether organizations care about diversity. Most do, or at least they say they do. The question is, why so much effort produces so little transformation? And that's exactly what we're unpacking today in an episode I'm calling The Diversity Paradox: Why Inclusive Culture Requires Uncomfortable Conversations. We're going to talk about the gap between performative DEI and authentic inclusion. We're going to explore how GenX leaders can bridge generational differences in how we approach diversity. And we're going to get practical about creating psychologically safe spaces where real dialogue can actually happen. Because if your people can't have the hard conversation, they're just having the polite one. And polite conversations do not transform culture. Let's start with the elephant in every conference room in America: performative DEI. And I want to be thoughtful here because I don't believe most leaders set out to be performative. Most of them genuinely want to do the right thing. But somewhere between the intention and the execution, something gets lost. In High Value Leadership, I write about stewardship of culture as one of the 5 pillars of the High Value Leadership Trademark Framework. And stewardship means you are actively shaping and nurturing the environment, not just decorating it. There's a difference between putting a welcome mat at the door and actually making the house feel like home. Inclusion is not a poster. It is not a checkbox. It is a lived, daily, sometimes messy experience. So how do you know when DEI has become performative? I'll give you a few indicators. When the diversity report looks great, but the retention numbers for underrepresented employees tell a completely different story. When training happens once a year and nobody references it again until the next annual session. When leaders use the right language in public, but their decision-making patterns in private tell a completely different story. That's the paradox. The optics of inclusion can actually mask the absence of it. Authentic inclusion requires what I call balanced responsibility, another pillar of high-value leadership. That means holding high standards while simultaneously creating an environment where people feel safe enough to be honest, to challenge, to say, this isn't working. There was a manufacturing company that brought me in, and leadership was genuinely confused about why they had high turnover among their diverse hires. When we looked deeper, new employees were being placed in roles and then essentially abandoned. No mentorship, no integration into the social fabric of the teams, just a seat at the table with no one passing the conversation their way. That is the gap. And closing it requires more than policy. It requires leaders who are willing to look at their own behaviors, their own assumptions, and ask whether their actions match their aspirations. And yes, that is uncomfortable, which is exactly why it works. Now let me talk to my fellow GenX leaders for a minute, because we occupy a very unique space in this conversation. We are old enough to remember when nobody was talking about DEI at all, and young enough to understand why these conversations matter. We grew up code switching before anyone gave it that name. We watched our parents navigate workplaces that were not designed for them, and we told ourselves we'd do it differently. But here is the tension. The generations coming behind us, millennials and Gen Z, they approach diversity with a directness and urgency that can feel unfamiliar. They are not interested in incremental progress. They want systemic change, and they want it now. Meanwhile, the boomers and older leaders may still view DEI as optional or worse, as a threat to meritocracy. And there we are, Gen X, sandwiched in the middle, trying to translate between two very different worldviews. In my own career, spanning automotive, manufacturing, healthcare, nonprofit, and professional services, I have watched this generational dynamic play out in real time. I have been in rooms where a younger employee raised a legitimate concern about equity, and the response from senior leadership was dismissal, disguised as, "That's just how things work here." And I have also been in rooms where the urgency for change became so aggressive that it alienated the very allies you needed to make it happen. This is where emotional intelligence, the third pillar of high value leadership, becomes essential. As Gen X leaders, our superpower is that we can hold complexity. We can validate the urgency of younger generations while also working within the realities of organizational dynamics. We can be the bridge. But being a bridge means you have to be strong enough to hold weight from both sides without cracking. And that takes intentionality. My challenge to every Gen X leader listening: stop trying to pick a side. Instead, become the translator. Help the emerging generation understand how to move the needle within systems that are slow to change. And help established leaders understand that the world has shifted, and clinging to the way we've always done it is not a strategy. It is a liability. So we've talked about the problem with performative DEI. We've talked about the generational complexity. Now, let's get into how you actually create the conditions for real dialogue, because the conversations that transform culture are never the comfortable ones. Psychological safety is not about making everyone comfortable. Let me say that again. It is not about comfort. It is about creating an environment where people can take interpersonal risks without fear of being punished, humiliated, or sidelined. That is Amy Edmondson's research, and it is deeply aligned with what I write about in High Value Leadership under Authentic Connection, the fifth pillar. You cannot build real relationships if people are editing themselves to survive the room. Here is what I have seen work across the industries where I have led and consulted. First, leaders must go first. You cannot ask your team to be vulnerable if you are wearing armor. If you want honest dialogue about race, gender, generational differences, or equity, you as the leader have to model what it looks like to sit in discomfort without running from it. Share your own learning edges. Admit what you do not know. That is not weakness. That is authentic connection in practice. Second, establish dialogue agreements, not rules. Rules feel punitive. Agreements feel collaborative. Things like, we will assume good intent while acknowledging impact. We will speak from our own experience rather than making sweeping generalizations. We will lean into curiosity when we feel defensive. These are not radical concepts, but they change the entire energy of a room when everyone has agreed to them voluntarily. Third, create space for processing. Difficult conversations do not end when the meeting ends. In the Shield Resilience Strategy Guide, which is this episode's free resource, I introduce the concept of the after-action review. After any significant challenge or interaction, you walk through 5 questions. What happened? What went well? What could be improved? What will I do differently? And what did I learn? This practice gives people a structured way to process what they experienced without letting emotions calcify into resentment. All right, here is your actionable exercise for this episode. And this one is quick but powerful. I call it the 3-question inclusion audit, and it takes about 5 minutes. You can do it right now if you are somewhere you can think. Get a piece of paper or open your notes app. I want you to answer 3 questions with radical honesty. Question 1. Who on my team has not spoken up in the last 2 meetings, and what might be preventing them? Do not just think about the obvious answers. Think about who might be editing themselves because of the room dynamics. Who might be staying quiet because they do not feel like their perspective will be received well. Question 2. When was the last time I had a conversation about inclusion that made me genuinely uncomfortable? If you cannot remember, that is your answer. Growth and comfort rarely share the same address. Question 3. What is one assumption about my team or culture that I have never questioned out loud? Every leader has them. The question is whether you have the courage to examine them. This exercise draws directly from the self-awareness component of the SHIELD framework, specifically the practice of pattern recognition. As the guide puts it, you ask yourself, what situations consistently challenge me? What early warning signs can I identify? This is that same principle applied to your leadership of an inclusive culture. Once you have your answers, choose one action you can take this week, just one. Maybe it is a one-on-one conversation with that quiet team member. Maybe it is bringing up a topic you have been avoiding. Small, intentional moves are what transform culture, not grand gestures. Let me bring this full circle. The diversity paradox is this. The organizations that talk the most about inclusion are not always the ones practicing it. And the conversations that feel the most risky are actually the ones that build the most trust. That is the paradox, and that is also the opportunity. If you are sitting here thinking, I want to lead this way, but I do not know where to start, let me point you to 2 resources. First, my book, High Value Leadership, Transforming Organizations Through Purposeful Culture. It walks you through the complete framework for building the kind of culture where authentic inclusion is not an initiative, it is who you are. Whether you lead a team of 5 or a division of 500, those principles apply. You can find it wherever books are sold. And second, I am building something very exciting. The High Value Leadership Intensive course is coming, and it is designed for leaders who are ready to stop theorizing and start transforming. I am talking about a deep dive experience where we take these frameworks off the page and put them into practice. Stay tuned for details because this is going to be a game changer. Now, here's what I want you to do right now. Go to the link in the show notes and download the SHIELD Resilience Strategy Guide. It is free. It is a comprehensive toolkit designed specifically for professional women navigating corporate challenges, and it includes the after-action review process, boundary scripts for real situations, the breathe technique for high-pressure moments, and daily practices that build resilience over time. It is the companion piece to everything we talked about today. And while you are at it, drop a comment below. Tell me, what is the most uncomfortable conversation you have been avoiding at work? Or if you tried the 3-question inclusion audit, share what came up for you. I read every single comment and I want to hear from you. If this episode resonated, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with another leader who needs this message. Because culture does not change through silence. It changes through courageous, intentional dialogue. Coming up on Thursday, we're diving into something near and dear to my heart. Innovation isn't just for tech companies. Manufacturing's culture edge. If you have ever thought innovation is only for Silicon Valley, you are going to want to catch that one. Until next time, keep unlocking your potential, empowering your teams, and transforming your culture. This is Shay Blackmon. Now go lead with purpose.